Greetings, greetings everyone. My name is Andrew Craig, and this is my behaviorist biography on Saul Axelrod. Saul Axelrod was a professor is professor emeritus of education and applied behavior analysis at Temple University from 1972 to 2011. He had retired from Temple, however, he's still active in the field of ABA. He received his PhD from Florida State in 1970, and he did his postdoctoral in applied behavior analysis at University of Kansas soon after. He is still active in the field as of 2018 with research publication contributions, where he's 4th or 5th on the article, book reviews, and book contributions, so a few chapters or helping editing with different things, from 2012 to 2018, so the span since he left Temple. Axelrod's main focus in his career was on advancing the theoretical understanding of applied behavior analysis and advocating for the importance of further use and implementation of behavior analysis principles, interventions, strategies, and practices in other disciplines. In terms of other disciplines, he was really focused on special education and general education in terms of how ABA could be used within those fields, and was very passionate about it. So when I was looking through Axelrod's 40-plus year career, he tackled a lot of subjects, but his work does fall into lots of different patterns, especially articles and publications that he worked on where he was either first or second author on them. So the three categories, and the grand majority of these were focused on general or special education practices and how they relate with, or how ABA relates with them. The three categories here are theory and practice shaping call to action articles. So these are his kind of advocating articles for change in ABA, needing for more acceptance and an integration into disciplines like education. The next category were literature reviews and meta-analyses of common ABA practices, some of which are in education, some outside of, but focus on common ABA practices to help evaluate effectiveness, and where maybe there are some implementation errors and whatnot that are getting in the way of them being used in education and other fields. The third category are educator and practitioner instructional book publications. So he was wanting to provide ABA skills and practices to educators and other practitioners who might be using ABA practices in their respective fields. This presentation will also highlight a few kind of outlier articles as well, just to kind of get a more well-rounded idea of his career. So the first section are these call to action articles. So this is where he's really prescribing change, especially within the field of education, and how ABA is accepted within it. So really all these articles have to do with that, but these first three are really about how people in general, but then also teachers, struggle with the behavior analysis concepts and trusting the use of them. And what are some of the barriers that are in the way. What's wrong with behavior analysis, just kind of general public, whereas why teachers do not use behavior modification is more the specific barriers to teachers and educators with ABA. In the 1993 article, Integrating Behavior Technology into Public Schools, this was actually an article that was published in a school psychology journal, and the tone felt more like it was trying to be delivered to people who are developing helping to develop best practices within the schools so that behavior technologies aren't just used in the schools but are better incorporated and integrated into the curriculum so that teachers don't have to work quite so hard in implementing behavior modification into their regular teaching behavior. And then this last article here, when IDEIA came into being in 2004, 4 years later in 2008, Axelrod and a colleague did a review on kind of where education was in terms of implementing these things. What are some of the history beforehand of using behavior practices in schools, because this was a big emphasis on is to do more FBAs and behavior plans, because they were finding that it was hard to discern whether there was an actual learning disability or whether it was a behavioral contingency or something at work that was impeding the students' success. So behavior modification was a huge emphasis in the new amendment. So Axelrod goes through kind of the past, the current attempts. What are some of the early attempts to implement these things, and then where does education need to go and improve and do better at this. The next sections are kind of his review. So let's review and analyze. Look at different ABA strategies that are used a lot, either in schools or otherwise, and whether they're effective or what are, and if there are some problems, what are they and how can they be fixed. The first article, though, at the top here, Autism and Beyond, although technically it's a review, it is very similar to the last section, where it's a call to action. So it is a review of ABA studies, and that autism has become such a major focus in the ABA community, and the question being asked in this article is, is the field getting blinders and only focusing on autism and neglecting other areas that could be using ABA practices? And within this, it's really emphasizing that not just with autism, but with general education and common everyday problems, ABA practices could be very helpful also. The next article here was one of his first research contributions, and this was on token reinforcement programs and special classes. So he did a review of all the different, many of the different uses of token reinforcement in special education classes. This spanned lots of different disabilities, lots of different behaviors focused on, but the overall token reinforcement was successful. And this was all the way back in 1971. The next set, it seemed that Axelrod during this period of the mid-90s was really focused on different cooperative learning and peer learning strategies. So these are two articles where he was reviewing first cooperative learning, and then secondly peer tutoring, and what basically investigating how it's successful, but then how can it be changed to be even more successful, or are there errors in implementation, those sorts of things. And then lastly, kind of an outlier article, but still a review, is he did a review of overcorrection studies. So within the punishment literature, he was focusing on overcorrection. And actually, if you dive a little deeper into Axelrod's career, he does have a extended focus on punishment practices, that That's one of his other passions. All right, so contribution to the literature. So Ermengarde Burks. This is so he was involved with lots of different book publications, especially for educators and practitioners trying to acquire ABA skills. So he was involved with 2 editions of Behavior Modification for Classroom Teachers. He wrote 2 books in the How to Improve Classroom Behavior series, How to Help Students Remain Seated, and How to Use Group Contingencies. And then also within that series, he co-authored a 3rd installment called Teach Self-Control Through Trigger Analysis. He also co-authored the 3rd edition of a general behavior modification text, Behavior Modification Basic Principles. And then lastly, there's other book publications, but these were the main ones. And then the last one I have here is The Effects of Punishment on Human Behavior. So there's his focus on punishment again. And then this was the best example I could find where I could actually get a sense of the content of what was in his book, in the books he worked on. So this was a chapter of a book, and it was called Dealing with Classroom Management Problems. And basically it's a message to teachers of how to deal with classroom management problems. And this focuses on explaining positive reinforcement and how it can be used in the classroom. It includes tips for how to determine what makes a good reinforcer, gives a few concrete examples of successful attempts by teachers, so kind of like case studies. It gives a few case studies, and then he gives 8 tips / guidelines for how to solve problems in the classroom constructively, using behavioral methods. All right. My 5 interview questions. Yeah. My 5 interview questions here. So the first one, I really wanted to focus on, because he had such a view for the future and where the field was going and needed to go, I wanted to ask a few questions that kind of were geared towards that. So the first question is, what have been some of the major advances in the field of education / special education with regards to the acceptance and implementation and integration of ABA practices? What are the ways educators have listened to your recommendations? Conversely, what are some of the remaining downfalls or blind spots of educators and school systems in using ABA today? Question 3. In the article, Applied Behavior Analysis, Autism and Beyond, yourself and colleagues analyze ABA literature and its narrowing focus on to its uses for autism, but called for the necessary broadening to problems faced by society as a whole, particularly general education. After 8 years, has this tendency become even truer? And what are the most neglected problems in which ABA could provide effective solutions? And then 4th, I have a particular interest in how ABA can be used with children / students with ADHD or who simply exhibit significant problems with attention and hyperactivity. There seems to be a lack of resources beyond medication here. What are some of the ways ABA can be effective in addressing ADHD or significant related problem behaviors? And in 5, you were involved in the writing and editing of many book publications. What was your favorite project of these that you worked on? Or which of these projects do you view as most influential to their target demographic? And then lastly, the implications of his work. This really is just goes along with the summaries of his contribution to the literature. But basically what I had found was his implications of the work was to advocate for ABA practices and make change to break down the barriers of ABA's acceptance in fields, especially education, special education. He also had a major focus on refining the common practices that had gained acceptance in different fields. So the ones that were being accepted, you want to make sure they were effective, and then how could they be even used even better. He also provided educators and practitioners with the ABA tools himself and others prescribed through his book contributions. He became a leader for shaping ABA theory and practice, and an advocate and example for the growing acceptance and implementation of ABA in education.